on the horizon for 2028 in the Democratic primary?
Right now?
Yeah.
Bernie and AOC.
No.
They got the biggest crowds.
That doesn't matter.
It won't sustain itself, but right now they have no leader.
Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet. I don't think people realize we already have a lot of socialism. Even the country's oldest Latino civil rights group came out against it, yet AOC keeps defending it, saying gender is fluid, language is fluid. Yes, and Latino voters are fluid.
Bill Maher has once again directed strong criticism toward Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, making his opinion clear in unmistakable fashion. Ever since AOC emerged onto the national political scene, Maher has questioned many of her views, and her latest remarks along with her progressive approach have only fueled more debate. Across several fiery moments on Real Time, he's challenged her positions with the same direct and unapologetic delivery that has become his trademark. The exchanges are intense, outspoken, and difficult to overlook. And judging by how quickly the discussion is evolving, there's likely much more still to come.
Carville knew how to win, and he blamed the Democratic losses this November 2nd on stupid wokeness, to which AOC fired back that wokeness is a term almost exclusively used by older people these days. So that should tell you all you need to know. What? This is a term folks like you brought out very recently and had been proudly displaying at every march since. Just last year, The Guardian declared woke the word of our era. I guess they didn't get the memo from the Mean Girls Club.
Critics argue that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has leaned heavily into progressive woke politics, sometimes in ways they believe disconnect from the concerns of everyday voters. Earlier in her political rise, she openly embraced the label, frequently referencing it during rallies and public events as part of her broader message and identity. But as the term woke has grown increasingly controversial in public debate, often used by opponents as a criticism of progressive ideology, some commentators believe she may be trying to soften that association and create some distance from a label she once promoted more openly. At the same time, Bill Maher has shown little sign of changing his perspective. On Real Time with Bill Maher, he continues to push back against AOC's positions, criticizing what he sees as contradictions and political showmanship. His commentary remains blunt, confrontational, and hard to tune out.
What a great strategy, never missing an opportunity to remind voters how lame and clueless and hopelessly uncool they are, especially since those are the ones who actually vote. But okay, fine. What word would you like us to use for the plainly insane excesses of the left that are not liberalism, but something completely different? Because you can't have that word liberal from us and think it should cover things like canceling Lincoln and teaching third graders their oppressors. That's all your new thing.
This dynamic is part of what draws some viewers to Bill Maher. His style is built around direct, unfiltered commentary, often delivered without softening his stance or using carefully polished language. If Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is indeed stepping back from the label woke, it naturally opens up a wider question. What name, if any, now best describes the set of ideas it has come to represent? Over the years, a broad mix of cultural and political debates has been grouped under that term, with critics arguing that some of those positions go beyond what many people view as reasonable or mainstream. Even as the vocabulary shifts, the underlying disagreements remain largely unchanged. Maher's point, in essence, is that renaming or rebranding an idea doesn't resolve the debate around it. Movements can be repackaged or reframed, but the core issues continue to exist, and they're likely to stay in the spotlight as public discussion evolves.
See a new poll reporting how much Latinos despise the woke term Latinx. It's about as popular with them as a reboot of Speedy Gonzales. Even the country's oldest Latino civil rights group came out against it, yet AOC keeps defending it, saying gender is fluid, language is fluid.
Many people remember when the term Latinx started gaining attention in progressive circles, with some public figures such as Gavin Newsom and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez being associated with its use or discussion. It was introduced as a more gender-inclusive alternative to traditional Spanish-language identifiers, but it quickly faced pushback from parts of the Latino community. Surveys and informal interviews often indicated that many of the people it was intended to describe neither commonly used the term nor identified with it, which fueled criticism that it didn't reflect everyday language or preference. Over time, the controversy became more pronounced. Newsom was later seen using the term less frequently, shifting toward more traditional phrasing in public communication. Ocasio-Cortez, meanwhile, continued to defend its intent, describing it as part of how language can evolve to include more people. Still, for some audiences, that reasoning didn't fully resonate, and they viewed the issue as out of step with more immediate concerns. Debates like this didn't just stay in the cultural sphere, they also contributed to a broader political conversation about representation, language, and public trust.
Identifying as Republican. So are Asian Americans, whose support for Democrats is down 16 points since the last election. A lot of that is because, in the name of achieving equity in schools, Democrats in deep blue cities have made it a mission to eliminate the advanced programs at which Asian kids excel. Asian parents said, okay, I wish all kids well, not a racist, but I need someone who acts like my lawyer. If you're a parent and wanted schools to reopen a lot sooner than they did after COVID shutdowns, or think maybe your kid is getting a bad education partly because it's nearly impossible to fire a lousy teacher, yeah, you're going to say, congratulations, teachers, you got yourself a good lawyer. The Democratic Party's always got your back, 100%. But I've noticed my kid is kind of an idiot.
Many people recall when the term Latinx began gaining visibility in progressive political and cultural spaces, with figures such as Gavin Newsom and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez associated with its discussion or use. It was promoted as a more inclusive, modern alternative, but it quickly drew skepticism from segments of the Latino community. Polls and informal interviews frequently suggested that many of the people it was meant to describe did not commonly use the term or feel a strong connection to it, which fueled ongoing debate about how representative it actually was. As time went on, the criticism became more prominent and harder to dismiss. Gavin Newsom was observed using the term less often, shifting toward more traditional language in public messaging. Ocasio-Cortez, on the other hand, continued to defend its intent, framing it as part of the natural evolution of language and inclusion. For some voters, however, that explanation did not fully align with their perspective or broader public sentiment. Discussions like these not only sparked cultural debate but also contributed to a wider sense of political skepticism among portions of the electorate, which some observers believe may have had broader implications.
2028 in the Democratic primary.
Right now?
Yeah.
Bernie and AOC?
No.
They got the biggest crowds.
That doesn't matter.
It won't sustain itself, but right now they have no leader. Okay? But this is the thing the Republican Party has to understand, too. Both parties lost in the last election. Trump won, okay? And I don't know if that's going to change.
It isn't completely clear what Kevin McCarthy is trying to emphasize here, but one idea does stand out. If figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders were to gain more influence within the Democratic Party, it could pose difficulties in terms of winning national elections. There's no question they can attract large, highly energized crowds. Their events consistently draw strong enthusiasm, with supporters who are deeply engaged and passionate. However, recent election cycles have shown that this kind of crowd energy doesn't always translate into votes. The excitement at rallies doesn't necessarily carry over to the ballot box. We've seen similar patterns before. In 2024, high-profile endorsements, celebrity involvement, and packed events created a sense of strong momentum. Yet when election results were tallied, that apparent enthusiasm didn't fully reflect in the final vote totals. The main lesson is fairly clear. Winning elections takes more than excitement. It requires broad appeal, a well-defined strategy, and policies that resonate with voters beyond a committed base. Without that broader reach, even intense enthusiasm may not be enough to secure victory.
And then Vance and Jr. will fight it out for that crowd.
AOC and Bernie, and who's at the top of the ticket?
They're going to lead right now.
Who's at the top of that ticket, Kevin? Because if it's not Bernie, he's going to be vice president and then wait his turn?
No, it would be. Bernie's been running each time. I'm just saying who's in the lead right now. I don't think that's how it ends up.
But big crowds don't necessarily mean who's the right candidate. You know, when I started
but it drives where the ideas are going to go. It's going to drive the money for a while.
It doesn't make them the winner.
It doesn't make them the winner. You'll have to wait till you'll get 2 years out, and then you'll start seeing these governors that start showing solutions. You also have to know, what is the issue going to be? Are we going to have a foreign policy issue? Are we going to have an economic issue? And who's been the best and leading in that? But right now, for the Democrats, who's going to lead for the next 2 years? The money is going to... AOC outraised everybody in the House.
And it's all small.
That's a line of criticism often directed at Democrats. The debate usually isn't about who can raise the most money, because in most cases, that isn't the deciding factor on its own. Kamala Harris is often pointed to as an example. In the most recent election cycle, she saw a significant spike in fundraising soon after becoming the party's nominee. Those figures made headlines and fueled a perception of growing momentum. But when voters ultimately went to the polls, that financial advantage didn't necessarily lead to the outcome many expected. The final results came in below earlier projections and expectations. The broader point is simple. Funding can increase visibility and strengthen a campaign's reach, but it can't make up for a message that doesn't truly resonate. At the end of the day, voters aren't persuaded by large budgets or highly polished campaign operations alone. What tends to carry more weight is authenticity, clear communication, and policies that speak to everyday concerns. Without that kind of connection, even the most well-funded campaigns can fall short when it matters most.
Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet. I don't think people realize we already have a lot of socialism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want.
It's a point Bill Maher has raised before, and it does tend to connect with a portion of voters. A common assumption is that democratic socialists are basically interchangeable with mainstream Democrats, which often leads people to place figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Zohran Mamdani in the same category without much nuance. In practice, the differences between these political positions are more complex than that. While both operate within the Democratic Party, their views are more closely aligned with democratic socialism, a framework that generally favors a larger and more active role for government in shaping economic and social policy. For some voters, particularly moderates, that distinction is significant, especially when they are wary of policies they perceive as shifting too far left. Critics argue that these ideological differences can influence policy priorities in ways that may not fully align with the broader electorate. This is where Maher's concern comes in. The idea that if a figure like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez were to lead a national ticket, it could create distance with centrist voters and potentially affect outcomes in a general election.
Are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more. You think you're going to win an election on that? This just seems like more extremism at a time when Americans are begging both parties, please, could just one of you act normal?
Bill Maher is fairly direct in his criticism on this point. He suggests that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez could face significant challenges in a national election if she continues to be associated with what critics label as woke politics and democratic socialist ideas. In his view, these positions may strongly energize a loyal base, but they can also alienate moderate voters, often the decisive group in general elections. For Maher, the issue comes down to a tension between staying ideologically consistent and appealing to a broader electorate. He often references policy debates, particularly in cities like New York, as examples that shape public perception. Proposals tied to expanded social programs, such as wider access to early childhood education, including for undocumented immigrants, are frequently cited by critics in this discussion. Similarly, ideas like fare-free public transit, associated with local politicians such as Zoran Mamdani, are sometimes pointed to as policies that raise questions among more centrist voters about feasibility and priorities. Maher's underlying argument is fairly simple. Whether justified or not, policy positions shape how voters perceive a candidate, and those perceptions can ultimately play a decisive role in election outcomes.
Either MAGA's crypto crony capitalism or city-run grocery stores? No, I don't want that. I want a Democrat who reassures me if you like your Whole Foods, you can keep your Whole Foods.
At the end of the day, Bill Maher's argument is fairly direct. Elections are not determined by ideology alone. Success depends on perception, trust, and a candidate's ability to connect with everyday voters. While figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez may energize a highly motivated base, that level of enthusiasm does not always translate into broad support across the wider electorate. From this perspective, many voters have grown more selective about messaging that feels detached from their immediate concerns. They often place greater emphasis on stability, economic opportunity, and practical policy solutions rather than proposals they view as overly abstract or ideologically driven. The broader takeaway is relatively simple, even if it remains debated. Momentum, fundraising strength, and media attention are not sufficient on their own without genuine, wide-ranging electoral appeal. Seen through this lens, critics argue that if the Democratic Party fails to maintain that balance, it risks repeating familiar political challenges. As Maher often points out, ignoring those signals doesn't just affect media narratives. It can ultimately have consequences at the ballot box.